Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of My Ordinary Life, the podcast from Inclusion North, which offers you a rare invitation to hear about life from a different perspective. Season 2 of My Ordinary Life is all about a topic that many people try their best to avoid: death and dying. But at Inclusion North, we have a group of people with a learning disability, autistic people and family carers who've been working together for 6 years on a project all about this, and who are very comfortable talking about these subjects. I'm Karen Parry, and as your host, I'll bring members of our group together with experts whose jobs are closely connected to death and dying. We'll share our knowledge and experiences as we explore ways of everyone having honest, accessible conversations about life, death, and what happens next. And along the way, we'll hopefully prove that it doesn't have to be hard or uncomfortable or sad, and that these are conversations that we can all have with the right support. In these episodes, we talk openly and clearly about our own death and the deaths of people we love. If that isn't something you feel ready to listen to just now, maybe save these episodes for later, or listen with a family member or friend who you can talk to after the episode about what you've heard and how you feel. Welcome, everyone, to My Ordinary Life podcast. Thank you for joining us. Today, our subject is grief, which is a word that not everyone might understand what it means. So we're going to start by asking Shirley, can you explain to us what grief is?
Grief, I guess, is the sadness that people feel when somebody's died. I mean, you can have grief over quite a few different things. You might have grief because you got divorced or whatever. But generally, when we talk about grief, it's to do with somebody dying that you love and all the feelings that go with that.
Yeah, thanks, Shirley. And as a group, we're going to talk about some of those feelings and what that might be like. And we're going to share some of our experiences that we've had when people who we love have died. So, Saeed, would you like to start and share one of your experiences?
Yes, my father died in 2017, and my mother died after just a couple of years. And being away from them, and hearing that, first of all, my father died. He was quite aged, 90 plus, and few years he was unable to move. His death was not shocking and not much surprise, because he was not doing well in hospital, coming and going back. Being here, apart from parents or loved one, when they died, it is very painful, I would say. I will use the level of grief. And we, as a Muslim, we accept death. It is consequently, everybody has to die. But if you have a loved one around or a family around, that can make it more easier. We go to each other's house and comfort each other, sitting with them. But living here as a away from the family, so you don't have that kind of comfort or anybody to come to help you to go through that grief. So you are on your own most of the time. If you have any family member that can help. When my mother, she died, I spoke to her a day before her death, and she had COPD, but she was functioning fine. She had hospital visit a couple of days before, and all the tests was normal. But she said her news death was quite surprise to me when I hear that. I spoke to her yesterday, and we had a discussion. We had video chat. My daughter, she was born, and she saw that. So it was quite, grief-wise, quite intense compared to my father, because so living in, that was just Muslim perspective, and Muslim, they grieve for minimum for 3 days as whole family. So it is in Muslim community or most of ethnic community, death and dying is never discussed, and it's very new topic and never explored. And there's a different way of grief which Muslims are coming across, and these celebrate death of loved one in different way. Yeah, I would say that, yeah.
Thanks, Saeed, and we'll come back to some of the issues that you've raised a bit later on, but thank you for sharing that. Joanna, have you got a story about grief when someone you've loved has died?
Yeah, so my mum died 10 months ago, so it's still quite fresh. And so there's that part where the first anniversary of everything is quite sore. So I've had my first birthday without her, which I suppose that's the first, your birthday, you do that with your mum, don't you? So having that first birthday without her was really quite hard. And I knew that was coming. I knew I was going to feel grief really heavily that day. But I didn't realise I would be feeling it really heavily in the week before. So I thought I'll be really sensible. I'll take the week after off so I can have some nice rest and have some time to think about her. But actually, what I've learned is that time leading up to those. So for instance, at Christmas, that was quite close. So I think I was still in shock. But this next Christmas, I'll think that week leading up, that will be the hard time. So yeah, it was, my mum was ill for quite a long time. So grief, I suppose, isn't just after someone dies, it can be before someone dies. Because she was ill for 6 years, she had cancer, and we kept having miracle drugs that gave us more time, which was brilliant, and so lucky, because I know lots of people don't get that. But there was always this, it's going to come, like there is no cure. So I think there was a kind of, gets called anticipatory grief, which means that you're getting ready for feeling really bad. So living in that for a long time was an interesting and hard time. But really beautiful things happened in that. When we were given time by being told there's not much time left, we were able to really enjoy that time together. So for instance, a grief I had was that I didn't have children. I thought, my mum's never going to know my children. That was something that was really hard at the beginning. But then she did meet my children. She met both of my children. And my daughter remembers her. I'm not sure about my son, but we keep her alive. We talk about her a lot. My daughter drew a picture for her just a couple of days ago and said, this is me and this is Granny. So I'm still quite raw, I suppose, and still dealing with my grief. And I try and push it down in a box a lot, I think, and just get on with life. But it doesn't work out to do that, because then when you do talk about it, you end up releasing the sadness.
Thanks, Joanna. And for anybody watching or listening who's worried about Joanna, we did talk about the feelings we might have having these conversations. Everyone knew what conversation we were coming into. Joanna's fine. And I think being sad and crying is a natural part of grief when people die. And I think sometimes we can feel embarrassed about it, or we need to make it all right. Whereas actually just to sit with Joanna and feel that sadness, and we've all had people we love who've died, so we all know what that feels like, is sometimes all we need to do, rather than, oh, don't cry, are you okay? Yeah. Let's move on, let's change the subject, you know? So I think, particularly for people with a learning disability as well, I think they can be overprotected. We can think, oh, we don't want them to be upset, let's not explain, let's not tell them their mum's going to die. And I think that's probably the wrong thing to do, but actually we're going to ask an expert, because Dawn, your dad died not many, many years ago, so still quite recently. So you've got that experience, haven't you, that you're going to share with us?
I'll start from the beginning, right away up to his pass. The carers come, got Dad ready, and he's sitting in his chair waiting to go to Morrison's for shopping. He thought he'd give him £1,000 because he's all smiles. And then got to Morrison's, but Dad was on 10 litres of oxygen, so I had to carry 3 bottles of oxygen with her We waited and waited Morrison's for a breakfast over an hour. Then my mum said, where's the breakfast? Because my husband's on oxygen. How my dad's like a joker. He says, why is people just looking at me? And my sister turned around and went, you got oxygen here, you got your oxygen on your head. So then he shouted at me, sister, give us some off slush because it's like the coldest because he was on oxygen.
Right.
And it says, I can't, the woman's looking at us. The woman's looking at us. And he says, where's your mother? Where's your mother? Your mother gets some slush. And then he went, I want to go save the chickens because Dad's always cold. This is a story till he passed, by the way. And my mum went, we're not having chicken tonight. Says, it's cold, he wants to put his hand on the glass. So what happened is we managed to go out shopping around. He wanted a chronicle, but he didn't have time to read it. When we got home, it was cold, so Dad has to rest to get back in the house. And then we managed, my sister and my mum managed to get him in the house. And then my sister phoned the ambulance and said, it's going to cost like 18 minutes to come. And my mum went, you shouldn't have said that because he's going. And the ambulance arrived and my dad passed away. My mum had his hand like around him for 3.5 hours. No one would take him because he had a do not resuscitate form. So managed to get someone 3.5 hours later. And then they said, well, we're going to take him to Rate Lane. My sister went, no, you're not taking the Rate Lane. You're taking it to the RVI because his note's there. And the causes was something, the causes of death. And he had what do you call it, Karen?
So did he have asbestosis?
Yes, at the end, but we had to go to court and fight for that.
Oh, so there was an inquest.
Inquest.
And you had to go and see the coroner.
Yes.
All really complicated words, aren't they?
Yes.
So
I
we'll
have to try and think, and then it come back. He had asbestosis.
Yeah. So it sounds like for you, Dawn, when your dad died, sounded like quite an ordinary day. You went to Morrison's, you tried to get your breakfast. You wanted to go into the cold aisle where the chickens were to cool off? Was that why you wanted to be in the chicken aisle?
No, because it's always cold to put his hands on the glass.
So he wanted to put his hands on the, on the hot chicken aisle, not the fridges. Oh, where they're cooking the chickens. So he was always cold, so he wanted to put his hands on the warm glass where the chickens were. So ordinary things. He got home and it sounds like his health had turned really quite bad, so you called the ambulance.
Yeah.
But before they got there, had your dad died?
Yes.
Yeah. But then there was a problem in terms of who was going to take his body, and there was this kind of delay and a bit of a discussion about where his body would be taken to and where his notes were and who would know him and know his medical history.
But he looked like when I walked in, he looked like he was asleep.
That's really interesting, isn't it? So did it feel frightening to see your dad when he was dead, right? Isn't that a lovely message to say to people who might be a bit worried about seeing a relative who's
It's just when
died?
telling the neighbours I broke down.
Yeah. And it's hard, isn't it, having to... I think when someone dies, there's so many people that you have to tell. Mm. And it's quite difficult to tell that news again and again and again and again.
And you don't want it to be true, I think, is the thing. So by saying it, it kind of makes it true. And you don't want to accept it. You don't want to believe that they've gone. So you can pretend it's not true. It's not happening.
Yeah, so almost that disbelief and denial, pretending it's not happening. You can just have slight moments of calm where it doesn't feel real, maybe.
Yeah.
A bit of respite from those feelings. So Dawn, you did mention a couple of things that we said, the really complicated words, the coroner and the inquest.
Yeah.
So we have got some easy read information about those two things that we will put in our show notes. But just to quickly explain, an inquest is kind of an investigation. If somebody dies and they don't really know why that's happened or it wasn't expected, if it was maybe something unusual, then a coroner is a kind of doctor who investigates, and the inquest is the investigation, and they try and find out how that person died. And so they found out that your dad had died of asbestosis, which is a condition in the lungs
Yes.
that they think he got through the job that he did.
Dad worked in the shipyards.
Yeah, and that was a condition that was quite common for people that worked in those like heavy industries, wasn't it? But you actually went to the inquest, didn't you?
Yes, I went in the court.
You went into the coroner's court.
Yeah.
So what was that like? Were you terrified? Was it scary, intimidating?
Not really. I was sitting beside my nephew, Adam, and my mum and my sister was up front. And the doctor who seen my dad at the time before he went, because he was in and out of hospitals, he spoke up for my dad.
And were you able to follow what was happening? Did the coroner help you to understand what was going on?
Yeah, and my a sister who mum got, he was said, did you understand what was going on afterwards? I went, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, good. That's really important that you were kind of involved, because it's really important.
Yeah.
You were really close to your dad, weren't you?
Yeah.
So it would have been important for you to understand why he died.
Yeah.
Yeah. Grand, thanks Dawn. We'll come back to some of the feelings about that. That was the story about what happened, but we'll come back and touch on some of the feelings in a few minutes. But Shirley, have you got a story that you would like to share?
I think one of the deaths that I've experienced that touched me the most was when my next door neighbour died, but she was more than a next door neighbour. She was like a substitute mum, Margaret. And my youngest at the time was only about 7 or 8. And Margaret just took Amy, my youngest, under her wing, and she used to go next door because we were fostering at the time, so we had quite a busy household. And Margaret used to say, oh, she's in a busy household there. When she comes round here, she's an only child. So we were in each other's houses quite a lot. She was just a lovely, lovely woman. And sadly, she got cancer and she died when she was only 60. But she died in the hospice near where we lived. And the night before, they knew she was getting close to the end of her life. And they said just family only visit. And her daughter said, oh, my mum says your family. So Amy and I had gone to visit her, and I'd been feeding her strawberries and melon, and she was really enjoying them that evening. So it's quite a shock really, because we got a call in the middle of the night and she died at about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I think the difficult, apart from my personal sadness, the difficult thing for me was Amy, who absolutely adored Margaret. Actually, I think she was 8 by then. And I thought, I'm going to have to tell Amy before she goes to school. So in the morning, I told Amy that Margaret had sadly died, and she was upset. But then she said, can I see her? And I thought, and I was by then working in a children's hospice, and I was very emphatic about children being allowed to know things and involved in things. And then it came to my daughter, and I thought, oh, do I want her to see Margaret? But I thought, well, as long as she's still at the hospice and still in her bed. So I phoned the hospice and said, is Margaret still in her bed? And they said, yeah, come in and see her. So I took Amy in to see her. I think when somebody dies, often by the time they get in a coffin, or if they've died very peacefully, they do look very much like they're asleep, except there's a weird kind of emptiness about a dead body. Something's gone somewhere else. And Margaret looked, she didn't really look relaxed, her mouth was still open and that. But Amy went and stood at the foot of the bed. And I said, are you all right? And she said, it's a bit scary. And I said, do you want to go then? And she said, no. And just stood there for about 10 minutes. And that really challenged me in a way. It really taught me a lesson that, yes, it wasn't the nicest thing she'd ever experienced going and see Margaret after she died. But she wanted to be there, and she didn't want to be rushed away, and she wanted to spend that time there. So, yeah, I think it taught me a lesson, really, in not making decisions for other people, whether it's a young person, whether it's a person with a learning disability or whatever. They get to choose to do what's right for them.
Yeah, and I think having some preparation, knowing what the room's going to look like, what the person might look like, anything to help the person process and understand what they're seeing, why the person might look a bit different, can all help with those situations, can't
Absolutely, yeah.
Saeed, I'm going to come back to yourself now and go back to your experiences around you know, how grief is experienced and how it's expressed?
Well, the grief is quite difficult thing to go through it as a person. First of all, you don't see the loved one who died, and you don't believe them that, well, they said that it could be wrong. Specifically when my mother, she died the day before I spoke to her, I couldn't believe half of the day that she's died. And I went through this all mixed emotion. There might be mistakes, something like that. But firstly, you don't believe, and then you're going through a difficult time, and you don't have much support around as a relative. Probably in this case, in our culture, if anybody died in the village, the whole village come together and then comforting the family, and that quite relieving. When my sister, she died 25 years ago, so we didn't feel, because everybody was in our house, and most of the charge of the chore around and the house was taken by a relative and people. But here was totally different. My parents, they died in India, I was here, and they was also not in our home country. So the grief was quite intense and for a long time, to be honest. And also you feel sorry for them and for yourself as well. And my children, they were here and they couldn't see them. So, and they had very little time spent with both parents. So it's mix up different griefs coming together. So it's not only one losing them, it is also your own hopelessness. You can't do anything for them.
Yeah, so it sounds like the separation, because you were in a different country, and that almost aloneness made it even harder.
I think that's definitely play a big part in increasing your anxiety or grief, and you can't do anything about that. And not only me, I mean, there's millions of people living here from other country, and they all go through that. Some of the community, they have quite strong network in most of the city, but some of them, they don't have a new or just one or two people living. So I think I was one of those, and it is leaving you for quite long with the grief, and sometimes you regret to not being there.
Yeah, thanks, Saeed. And you talked about that sort of stage of disbelief at the beginning, particularly with your mother. Yeah. And Joanna, you had kind of talked a little bit earlier about not wanting to keep breaking the news to people, because you have to keep admitting to yourself that this is real and this is happening. And actually, in preparation for this episode, you did some research around the stages of grief, didn't you? Do you want to maybe share that and talk a little bit about that?
So I've got I created an easy read for the stages of grief. So I could go through what I came up with. So the stages are, people say there's 5 stages, but they don't always go in the same order. They can come up at any point. So the first one we've got is denial. This is when you don't believe the bad news. You think it can't be true, but you know that someone has died. Another stage is anger. This is when the loss becomes real. You might feel angry at yourself or others because it seems unfair. Bargaining, you might think, if only I'd done this differently, maybe everything would be okay. Depression, this is feeling very sad. You might not have energy to do anything. You might not want to talk to anyone and just be by yourself. Acceptance, when you start to understand and accept what has happened. Even though it's still sad, you can keep going and remember the good times.
Thanks, Joanna. And Dawn, just coming back to you, obviously you told us the story about your dad, and at the very end you touched on how when you had to tell the neighbours, that's when you broke down. So it feels like that's when you really started to feel it.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I just knocked on the neighbour's door and told them what's happened. Me auntie come with us, and I just cuddled down and broke down with anxiety and things. They broke down at the funeral as well, because I was sitting in front of the car well, because either for a coughing, and I broke down there as well.
Yeah.
But I had to be strong for Mum.
And that's interesting you say that. Other people in different episodes have talked about being strong for other people. And it almost seems like we try and put our feelings on hold a little bit because we want to make sure everyone else around us is all right.
Yeah.
Did you kind of feel that for your mum?
Yeah, well, my mum still gets upset over it. Mum was 17 and Dad was 19 when they got married.
Wow. So that's a big relationship, isn't it, for your
Yeah.
mum to, you know, a husband to have died after all those years?
Yeah.
Yeah. Shirley, can I come to you? You've worked in, you know, lots of professions where you've supported people who've been going through grief because people who they've loved have died. Can you talk to us a bit about the kind of different emotions and things that people feel and how normal that is?
It's really helpful when Joanna talked about the stages of grief. I think sometimes what's unhelpful about that is people think it's going to be a process that goes nice and neatly along. And of course, most people will tell you that what they thought was going to be a straight line ends up being a squiggle. Sometimes you don't know where you are in that process and what you're feeling. And I think, as you said before, making people understand, helping people to understand everything is normal. It's normal to be really sad, but equally, it's normal to still laugh at a joke. You know, although people say, I think about her every moment, you know, we still clean our teeth and boil the kettle and have a bath, whatever. And there are other things going on in life, and children probably do it best when they're grieving. We sometimes call it puddle jumping, because they're good at going in and out of the grief. And they can be really, really sad, but then go out and play on the trampoline as well. And actually that's a really good model for people to do, to understand that you kind of live with grief, that for all the difficult feelings, you might be angry one minute, sad the next minute, you know, despairing one moment, killing yourself laughing at something you've remembered the next minute. And that's all okay. It's all okay. When I've worked with bereaved children who are grieving, the most important message we say is it's okay to be sad and it's okay to be happy, because it's that mixture all the time of feelings.
Yeah, because I definitely think there can be maybe a feeling of shock that you've had a good day or a good hour, you've laughed, and you can almost sometimes maybe feel a bit guilty about that, and that's so wrong, isn't it? Because you are living with it, like you say, your life is going on, even though sometimes that you can think, how can life be going on when this has happened to me?
I think what you were saying before about being strong for people is another, it's very much part of, I suppose, the majority culture in the UK is the whole being strong and holding it together for people. And I worked a lot with families where a child had died, and the parents would often say, I'm being strong for the other children. You know, I don't cry till they've gone to bed. And I used to say to them, you know, what message do you think that's giving the children? You know, that somebody really important can disappear after this family, can die, and nobody's upset. You know, it's actually healthier for people to know that you're upset. And it's okay, you know, it's okay for parents to cry in front of their children. It's okay for people to acknowledge the sadness that they're feeling. And that's one of the things we're not terribly good at sometimes in our culture, is just I'll go with the flow, you know, if you fill up with tears. And when you're supporting somebody who's grieving, that can be hard and sad too. There's a balance to be struck. You know, you can listen to somebody's, I mean, when you were talking about your mum before, I could feel my eyes filling up because you were being so wonderfully honest about it all. And that's okay to, you know, to kind of recognise your sadness. If I came over and I was sobbing on your shoulder, that wouldn't be okay. You know, so somebody's grief is their grief. And sometimes we can feel sad for them, but how they grieve is entirely their choice.
Thanks, Shirley. Saeed?
Yes, I think adding to that, in BME background, the grief is mostly done by female. They cry for days and days. The male, they don't cry. They just either sit quiet or going to this 4-stage silently. Sometimes these 5 stages come together, not just one by one. So in some community, these grief goes for weeks and weeks, and specifically female go through a very hard time, constantly crying. If anybody new comes, they start crying again. So it's quite a difficult time for ethnic minority when they grieve.
Thanks, Saeed. And part of what we're trying to do with this podcast is to build people's confidence, talking about death and dying, talking about the people who we love who have died. And I know sometimes when someone close to us has died, sometimes people around us can be afraid to mention their name. So I'm going to kind of go back down the line and ask you for your advice really in terms of how can we get better at more comfortable talking about death and dying?
I like when people ask me about my mum. I really appreciate it. It keeps her alive in my memory, and I might get a bit upset talking about her, but I'm also happy at the same time that she's not gone, in that she's in people's memories. That's really beautiful to me.
Yeah.
And I'm really lucky because I have lots of friends who do ask me how I'm feeling, ask me things about my mum, or because my mum was ill for so long, she actually met quite a lot of my friends. So they have their own memories. So often they'll say, oh, do you remember that time we went here with your mum and we did that? And I love that. I love that keeping her alive in my memory.
Yeah. And in preparation for today, we said to anybody that, you know, if you were coming, you could bring a photograph of someone you love who's died, or a little memento, an object that reminds you of them. And Joanna, you have brought a photo of your mum, haven't you? Which obviously, if you're watching the video, you will kind of see Joanna showing that. And it just feels like we're bringing our people into the room, the people who are important to us, who have died. And that's a lovely photo of Joanna taking a photo of her mum.
This is when we went to America. My mum was American, so we went over for Thanksgiving a long time ago. And at the time I wanted to be a photographer. That's why I am doing a stylized photo where I'm taking a picture into the mirror, and there's lots of mirrors, and my mum's just putting up with me. But my mum hated having her photo taken, so also photos of my mum were really precious to me. And I think sometimes I can be a bit unhappy when people take my photos and be like, oh, I look horrible there. But then I think actually these photos might be important for someone else in the future. So I don't need to say horrible things about myself and just accept. I want to tell a story about a few months ago. I was in a shop and I started talking to somebody who I didn't know. And then the lady said, oh, where are you from? And I said, oh, I'm from this town. She was like, oh, so am I. And then she said, oh, are you Janice's daughter? And she knew my mum, and she recognised that I looked like my mum. And in the past, when people said, oh, you look like your mum, I would have been like, oh no, I don't want to look like my mum. But I was like, oh, I'm really glad I look like my mum and this person. And then she told me this lovely story about how my mum had helped her years ago when her son had been ill, and he had to stay in the house, but he loved trucks and mud, and he really just wanted to be in the mud. So my mum had dried loads of tea leaves, used tea leaves, and had taken them over on a really big tray so he could play with his trucks in the tea leaves. And it was such a lovely story. And I didn't know anything about that. So it was really nice to hear that.
Thanks for sharing that, Joanna. Dawn, you're part of our Stop People Dying Too Young group, and you've been part of the group since the beginning, 6 years ago. So you've got a lot of practice talking about death and dying with us.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to other people who haven't had as much practice with these conversations and find them a bit uncomfortable? What would you say to them to get them started?
Make sure they understand what dying is, and they get to talk about the loved ones, and then get free, they build their confidence up to talk about it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dawn. And Saeed, for yourself, in terms of people becoming more comfortable?
Well, like I mentioned in BME group, it is very less discussion, and more than 30 BME group living in Newcastle. Everyone has its own perspective, but everyone agreed that grief need to be shared and reduced and find the way to help each other. I think that need to be discussed openly in group and share with community, and also include the religious leader, they can make it more open and more approachable, and that they can convey to the people who's suffering.
Thanks, Saeed. Shirley, the same question to you.
I think we are getting better at it, but I think one of the difficulties we have, particularly in this country, is our reluctance to say dead or dying, and we use all sorts of strange words. You know, people have passed away or passed on, or, you know, if you say we've lost your granddad to a 7-year-old, they just think, you know, how careless, you know. So I think if from the beginning, from a young age, if we can just start talking about somebody dying, even when it's a pet, use the right words, and I think we get very confused. You know, suddenly somebody's a star in the sky, or they've gone to heaven, and if it's not your natural culture, if it's not a family that usually talks about heaven or life after death or anything, then that's very confusing. So I think we could simplify the language we use a lot by just talking about people dying and somebody being dead.
Lovely, thank you. And just before we finish, I'm really interested in the kinds of things that we do once the person has died to carry on remembering them or to honour them. Might be another way of expressing it, and people do all kinds of things, which is why I'm really interested to see if anyone has got any rituals or very special things or things that might happen by chance that bring that person to mind.
I got one.
Dawn, go first then.
My mum, what we do is when the memory comes up, we go to Creme and we take flowers, and my mum's put my dad's memory in the book, so it opens the book and says his name.
So the Creme's the crematorium, isn't it? And is that where he was
Tynemouth.
cremated? In
Tynemouth.
So you go there on the day that he died?
Yeah.
Every year?
Yeah, on the 7th of September.
Right.
Will be 5 year coming up.
So that's a really special day for you and your mum to go up to the crematorium.
Yeah, I usually go out for like a meal.
Yeah. So it's not, I guess there's sadness on that day, but is it also a nice day for you and your mum to spend together?
And sometimes my sister comes up, it depends if she can, because she lives down Yorkshire.
Yeah. Lovely, thanks Dawn, that's a great example. Saeed?
Well, normally when we were back home, we used to visit our sister's grave very often, I mean once a month or maybe more. But living here, we have picture of my mother and father in front of the door, which we always pass and see them. So when children, they also know used to that kind of picture, yeah.
My mum was she was amazing at making things. She was incredible. She could knit in the dark. She could crochet anything. If you'd say, oh, I want a Baby Yoda hat, then she would just crochet you one in it would seem like moments. It seemed like you'd make a cup of tea and then she made one. Probably a bit longer than that. I have a bedspread that she made, so it's a big quilt, and she bought that in the 70s when she still lived in America. She worked in a department store, as they'd call it, so like a big shop, and she got it reduced and she didn't manage to do it. She had 5 children, never had the time. But when lockdown came, she was like, right, I'm going to make this and I'm going to sleep under it before I die. So it took her months. It was lots of sewing and little stitches, but she created this beautiful Tree of Life quilt, which is stunning. And when she was in the hospice, we took that and she had that over her. And it was really beautiful. And then when it was getting close to the end, one of the nurses said, oh, do you want for that to be in the coffin with you? And we both went, no, because I'd already said, I really want this. And also she wouldn't have wanted this thing that she spent hours to go with her. So I have that on my bed and I'm quite precious about it. So I can be a bit like, no, you can't eat on it. But I have that on my bed, and every time I see it, I think of my mum and I feel like she's there, and all that time and energy that she put in with these marvellous hands. She just could do anything with those hands. And also my hands look a lot like my mum's hands, but what marvellous things will my daughter's hands do? What all these amazing things my mum's hands did, all these people she helped and looked after, and all these things she made, and then all the things I've done with mine, and then all the things my daughter will do with hers.
That's gorgeous.
I can remember Joanne's mum made a baby blanket. It's just 9 now.
Wow. You see, these things will just continue on and exist in the world that your mum sat and made.
Because I used to do knitting and that.
Yeah.
Shirley, what about yourself?
Oh gosh, so many things that I can think of. Two that come to mind. I seem to have so many mementos of people that I've worked with or families I've worked with. I remember a little girl who sadly died from a brain tumour when I was working in the children's hospice, and she was very shy because she'd being ill with the cancer had changed her appearance so much that she didn't communicate with people very well except through puppets. And she had these puppets that were the squirrel that was called Squirreletti and a badger. And so we used to communicate through Squirreletti and the badger. And after she'd sadly died, her mum came and said, "We'd like you to have Squirreletti." And I said, "Oh, no, I couldn't possibly take Squirreletti from you." And she said, "Oh, it's all right, there's loads of them at home." But it's very special to me.
Yes.
And I've still got it. But my eldest daughter, her second baby died towards the end of pregnancy. And her little boy at that time, her firstborn, was 3. And there's a lovely children's book called Water Bugs and Dragonflies that helps to explain death to children. And we'd got that from her. So dragonflies kind of became something really significant. And she did indeed have a dragonfly in her garden on the day that we had the funeral for little David. And so every year on the anniversary of that death, there's always something to do with dragonflies. Poor Kate has now got so many dragonfly things in her house, you know, dragonfly wall hangings, dragonfly cushion, dragonfly mug.
Lovely. So I think at that point we're going to bring this conversation to an end. It's been so beautiful. I think it's very appropriate we've had laughter and tears because I think they're very closely related. Yeah. And as we've discussed, they're both fine and totally normal when we're talking about death and dying. And just for my panel today to have come with like open hearts and courage and bravery and being prepared to be filmed and recorded having these conversations so we can help other people. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Oh my God.
If you enjoyed this episode and are feeling very kind, please rate, review and subscribe, and be sure to tell your family and friends to have a listen too. The music you've heard in these episodes was composed for us by O'Hooley and Tito and published by Voice Publishing. If you'd like to listen to the full song, you can find the link in the show notes. And if you'd like to share your ordinary life with us, we'd love to hear from you. You can find us on social media at Ordinary Life 66. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to catch up with you again soon.